Director Zax 427 paced nervously in his office aboard the Galactic Emergency Services Station, his 6 legs clicking against the polished floor. His translucent antennae twitched as he reviewed the latest report on his datapad. The luxury cruise ship Stellar Dreams had been trapped in a quantum storm for the past 36 hours, with 3,000 passengers from the galaxy's most delicate species aboard. "Sir," his assistant Trill entered the room, her bioluminescent spots glowing dim with worry. "The third rescue team has failed." She hesitated before continuing. They couldn't withstand the gravitational fluctuations. Their bodies were too fragile. Zax's outer membrane paled. 3 teams lost. 3 of his best teams, all unable to even reach the ship. The quantum storm was unlike anything they'd encountered before, creating pockets of intense gravity that could crush standard environmental suits. He moved to the window, gazing at the swirling purple and blue energies of the quantum storm visible in the distance. The Stellar Dreams was in there somewhere, its passengers growing more desperate by the hour. "We've tried everything, Director," Trill said softly. The floatlings couldn't navigate the gravity wells. The energy beings were scattered by the quantum interference. Even the silicon-based life forms crumbled under the pressure. Zax was about to respond when his antennae suddenly straightened. "Not everything," he whispered. "We haven't tried everything." He rushed to his desk, fingers dancing across the holographic interface. After a few moments of searching, he pulled up a file that had been sitting in their database for months. An application that most of the hiring committee had laughed at. "Sir," Trill floated closer, curious. "What are you thinking?" "Do you remember that application we received from the Sol system?" Zax asked, his voice mixing with hope and uncertainty. Trill's spots flashed yellow with alarm. "The human. Director, you can't be serious." They're Deathworlders." "Exactly," Zax exclaimed. "They evolved on a planet with crushing gravity, extreme temperature variations, and constant radiation from their sun. Their bodies are built like cargo ships compared to most species. But, sir, they're dangerous. Everyone knows humans are unpredictable. They drink poison for enjoyment. They expose themselves to radiation just to change their skin color. They deliberately enter dangerous situations for something they call fun." Zax turned to his assistant. "And right now we have 3,000 passengers trapped in the most dangerous situation imaginable. Maybe we need someone dangerous to save them." Before Trill could protest further, Zax opened the communication channel. After a few moments, a human face appeared on the screen. The being had dark hair tied back neatly, brown eyes, and what Zax had learned was called an Asian appearance. "Sarah Chen, Earth Emergency Response Unit," the human said crisply. "How can I help you?" "Ms. Chen," Zax tried to keep his voice steady. "This is Director Zax 427 of the Galactic Emergency Services. We've reviewed your application," and he took a deep breath. "We have an emergency situation that might require your unique capabilities." The human's expression remained professional, but Zax could see a slight upturn of her lips. "I'm listening, Director." As Zax explained the situation, he noticed something change in the human's eyes. Where most species would show fear or hesitation, he saw something else, something that both terrified and amazed him. He saw excitement. "I can be ready in 20 minutes, Sarah said when he finished. "Just send me the coordinates." After ending the communication, Zax turned to his still shocked assistant. "Trill, prepare the station for a human arrival. And," he paused, "maybe warn the medical staff not to panic when they see her walking around without an environmental suit." This was either going to be the biggest mistake of his career, or the moment that changed the galaxy's view of Deathworlders forever. Either way, Zax had a feeling things were about to get very interesting. The entire staff of Galactic Emergency Services Station 7 pressed against the observation windows, watching as the small human shuttle docked. Most of them had never seen a human in person before, and rumors spread quickly through the gathered crowd. I heard they can survive in temperatures that would boil most species, whispered a floating gas-based being. My cousin told me they can break metal with their bare hands. Another staff member added, their crystalline structure shimmering with nervous energy. The airlock cycled, and the crowd collectively moved back as Sarah Chen stepped through. She was dressed in what she considered standard rescue gear: black thermal suit, reinforced boots, and a utility belt filled with tools. To the aliens, she looked like a warrior ready for battle. "Welcome aboard Station 7," Director Zach said, trying to hide his own nervousness as he approached her. "Thank you for coming so quickly." Sarah smiled, causing several nearby staff members to flinch. They weren't used to seeing the rows of white bones humans called teeth. "Happy to help, Director. I've been hoping for a chance to prove what humans can do in rescue operations." As they walked through the station's corridors, Sarah noticed how everyone gave her a wide berth. She was used to this reaction. Being a Deathworlder meant most galactic species saw humans as walking natural disasters. In the briefing room, Sarah reviewed the rescue attempts so far. She watched footage of the previous teams failing to reach the cruise ship, her expression growing more focused with each recording. The gravity fluctuations peaked at 15 Gs, one of the technical officers explained, expecting the human to be shocked. Sarah nodded calmly. "That's intense, but manageable. During my training on Jupiter's moons, we regularly worked in variable gravity conditions. The quantum interference is more concerning, but I think I can work around it." The technical officer's tendrils curled in surprise. He had expected fear, not casual acceptance. "There's something else you should know," Director Zach added. "Most of the passengers are from Class 1 worlds, low gravity, stable environments, perfect weather. They've never encountered a human before." Sarah understood the implication. "They'll be scared of me." "Terrified," Zach corrected. "But we don't have a choice. The ship's systems are failing, and you're our last hope." Sarah stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the quantum storm. The swirling energies reminded her of the aurora borealis back on Earth, where she'd done her first rescue missions. "I've dealt with scared people before," she said softly. "When someone's life is in danger, they learn to look past their fears pretty quickly." She turned back to the room, her expression determined. "I'll need a few things: my personal rescue kit from my shuttle, direct access to the ship's blueprints, and," she paused, "someone brave enough to be my liaison with the passengers." The room fell silent. After a long moment, Trill floated forward, her spots glowing with a mix of fear and determination. I will assist you." Sarah smiled again, gentler this time. "Thank you, Trill. I promise I'm not as scary as the stories make humans sound. You literally just said you can survive conditions that would kill most life forms." Trill pointed out, her spots flickering with nervous humor. "Well, maybe we're exactly as tough as the stories say," Sarah admitted. "But that's exactly what those passengers need right now." Director Zach watched the exchange with growing hope. Perhaps this wasn't such a crazy idea after all. Sometimes the scariest option was the best one. "All right," Sarah said, checking her equipment one last time. "Let's go save some lives." The room watched in amazement as she strode out, head high, ready to face conditions that had already claimed 3 rescue teams. For the first time, they began to understand why humans had earned their reputation as the galaxy's most resilient species. The main control room of Station 7 buzzed with activity as Sarah Chen studied the holographic display of the trapped cruise ship. Trill floated nearby, her bioluminescent spots pulsing with a mix of anxiety and fascination as she watched the human work. "The Stellar Dreams is one of our most luxurious vessels," the chief engineer explained, his crystalline form sparkling as he spoke. Or at least it was, before the quantum storm hit. Now its main reactor is operating at 30% capacity, life support is failing, and the hull integrity. He paused, crystals dimming. "Well, it's not good." Sarah nodded, her eyes never leaving the display. "Show me where the other teams try to enter." The hologram shifted, highlighting 3 different approach vectors. Each path ended in a bright red marker indicating where the rescue teams had been forced to turn back. The quantum storm creates unpredictable gravity wells, Trill explained. One moment you're floating in 0G, the next you're being crushed by forces strong enough to bend metal. The ship's artificial gravity is the only thing keeping the passengers alive right now. And how long will that last? Sarah asked, finally looking up from the display. Director Zax's antennae drooped. 24 hours at most. After that, we'll have 3,000 passengers experiencing gravity fluctuations that would turn most species into paste. Sarah finished. Several aliens in the room shuddered at her direct language. Exactly, the chief engineer said. It's impossible to reach them. The gravity shifts are too unpredictable, too strong. No living being could survive that kind of stress. Sarah's lips curved into a slight smile. Actually, humans experience similar conditions during emergency drops. We call it high-G training. It's not comfortable, but it's definitely survivable. The room fell silent. Trill's spots flashed pale blue with shock. You train for this? Of course, Sarah replied, as if it was the most normal thing in the galaxy. Earth's emergency services often deal with variable gravity conditions. Space stations, orbital habitats, lunar bases. You never know when you'll need to make a rescue in challenging conditions. She pointed to a section of the ship's hull. There's a maintenance airlock here, close to the ship's spine. The structural integrity would be strongest there. If I can reach it, I can use it to board. But the gravity wells, the chief engineer started, will be a challenge, Sarah admitted. But humans have dense bones, strong muscles, and most importantly, she tapped her head, we're really good at adapting to changing conditions. It's kind of our thing. Director Zax stepped forward. Ms. Chen, I need to be clear. This mission is beyond dangerous. We've already lost 3 teams. With all due respect, Director, Sarah interrupted. Those teams weren't human. We're built differently. Where I come from, this would be called a Tuesday. She pulled up a new display, showing the ship's internal layout. The real challenge won't be getting there. It'll be helping 3,000 terrified passengers trust a Deathworlder long enough to save them. Trill floated closer, her spots now glowing with a warm golden light. That's why I'll be going with you, to help them understand you're here to help. Sarah looked at the small floating alien with respect. Brave of you. Are you sure you can handle the gravity fluctuations? My species evolved in gas giants, Trill said proudly. We're tougher than we look. Aren't we all? Sarah smiled. She turned back to Director Zax. I'll need 30 minutes to prep my gear. After that, we go in. The director nodded, his antennae quivering with a mix of hope and fear. As he watched the human begin her preparations, he couldn't help but wonder. Had he just authorized a rescue mission, or sent another team to their doom? But looking at Sarah's confident movements and hearing her matter-of-fact approach to conditions that terrified most species, he began to understand why humans had gained their reputation as the galaxy's ultimate survivors. The rescue pod shuddered as Sarah piloted it through the outer edges of the quantum storm. Beside her, Trill's normally floating form was secured in a specially designed safety chair, her spots flickering with each gravitational wave that hit their small vessel. Gravity spike incoming, Sarah announced, her hand steady on the controls. This might feel a bit strange. The pod suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 tons, then nothing at all, then back to crushing weight. Trill watched in amazement as her human companion worked through conditions that would incapacitate most pilots. How are you still functioning? Trill asked, her voice shaking from the gravitational shifts. Sarah kept her eyes on the approach vector. Human pilots train for extreme conditions. Plus, our inner ear helps us adapt quickly to gravity changes. Comes from evolving on a planet with lots of natural disasters. They finally reached the maintenance airlock of the Stellar Dreams. The quantum storm had turned the once gleaming white hull into a stressed, discolored surface. Sarah activated her magnetic boots and prepared for the hard part. "Stay here until I secure the airlock," she told Trill. "If anything goes wrong, the pod's autopilot will take you back to the station." Before Trill could protest, Sarah opened the pod's hatch and stepped out into the chaos of the quantum storm. The gravity shifted wildly, one moment trying to tear her away from the ship, the next crushing her against it. She grit her teeth and kept moving, each step carefully calculated. Inside the cruise ship, the passengers had gathered in the main atrium, seeking comfort in numbers. They watched the external cameras with growing fear as a strange two-armed, two-legged creature made its way toward their airlock. "It's a Deathworlder," someone screamed when they recognized the human form. "We're doomed." The ship's captain, a tall, willowy being named Estelle, tried to maintain order. "Please remain calm. The GES has sent this rescue specialist to help us." Sarah finally reached the airlock and began the manual override sequence. Her muscles strained against the shifting gravity as she turned the emergency crank. To the watching passengers, it looked like she was casually bending metal with her bare hands. The airlock finally opened with a hiss of equalizing pressure. Sarah stepped inside, her boots clicking against the deck. She touched her communicator. "Airlock secured, Trill. You can come across now." A few minutes later, Sarah and Trill entered the main atrium. The crowd of passengers immediately backed away, creating a wide circle around them. Sarah could see dozens of different species, some floating, some crystalline, some seemingly made of light, all watching her with obvious fear. "Greetings," Sarah said, keeping her voice soft and her hands visible. "I'm Sarah Chen from Earth Emergency Response. I'm here to help." A small glowing child floated closer, curious despite its parents' attempt to pull it back. "Are you really a Deathworlder?" it asked innocently. Sarah knelt down to be at eye level with the child, moving slowly to avoid frightening anyone. "Yes, I am. But being a Deathworlder just means I'm strong enough to help when things get really tough. Like right now." Trill floated forward, her spots glowing with reassuring colors. "Everyone, please listen. The human speaks truth. She made it through the quantum storm when no one else could. She's our best chance at survival." A violent shudder ran through the ship, making the point for them. Several passengers stumbled, but Sarah remained steady on her feet. Without hesitation, she reached out and caught a crystalline being before they could fall and shatter. The rescued passenger looked up at her with all 7 eyes. You saved me." Sarah helped them back to their feet. "That's why I'm here. And I promise you, no matter how scared you are of me, I'm going to get every single one of you out of this alive." For the first time since the storm hit, the atrium filled with something new. Hope. The ship's alarms blared through the corridors of the Stellar Dreams as another gravity wave slammed into the hull. Sarah steadied herself against a wall, her enhanced strength allowing her to stay upright, while several floating passengers tumbled through the air. "Hull breach in Section C," the ship's computer announced. "Emergency shields failing." Sarah turned to Trill, who was helping to organize the passengers in the main atrium. "Keep everyone calm. I'm heading to Section C. Alone." Trill's spots pulsed with worry. "But the gravity fluctuations are strongest there, which is exactly why I'm the only one who can handle it," Sarah replied, already running toward the danger. The passengers watched in amazement as she sprinted through gravity that would crush most species. She reached Section C to find a nightmare scenario. The hull had cracked, and the emergency shield flickered weakly, barely holding back the vacuum of space. 3 crystalline passengers had been caught in the area when the breach occurred, their forms glowing with distress. "Hold on," Sarah called out. She pulled a repair kit from her utility belt and began working on the shield generator. Her muscles strained against the intense gravity as she replaced the damaged power cells. One of the crystalline beings let out a musical cry of alarm as the gravity shifted again. The others joined in a harmonic of fear as they saw hairline cracks forming in their bodies. Without hesitation, Sarah moved away from the generator and toward the endangered passengers. She knew what she had to do, even if it meant exposing herself to the full force of the quantum storm's gravity waves. "Trust me," she said, reaching out to the nearest crystalline being. One by one, she gathered them close, using her own body as a shield against the worst of the gravitational forces. The passengers, despite their terror of the Deathworlder, clung to her as she guided them to safety. Back in the atrium, Trill watched the external cameras in disbelief. She's carrying them, in gravity that would shatter most species. The gathered crowd murmured in amazement as they watched Sarah emerge from Section C, 3 crystalline beings safely in her care. Her face was strained with effort, but her steps remained steady. As she set the rescued passengers down, their crystalline forms chimed with gratitude. The sound spread through the atrium as other passengers began to see their rescuer in a new light. "The hull breach is contained," Sarah announced, wiping sweat from her forehead. "But we need to move everyone away from the outer sections. The ship's structure won't hold forever." A floating gas being approached her. "You saved them. Even though we were all afraid of you, you risked yourself to save them." Sarah smiled gently. "Being afraid is natural. But right now, we need to work together to survive. Being a Deathworlder just means I'm built to handle the tough stuff." Suddenly, the ship shuddered violently. New alarms began to sound. Multiple hull breaches detected. The computer warned. Structural integrity at 40%. Sarah looked at the worried faces around her. Where before she had seen fear of the Deathworlder in their midst, she now saw something different. Trust beginning to form. "All right," she said, her voice carrying across the atrium. "I need volunteers. Anyone who can handle variable gravity. Anyone with engineering knowledge. Anyone willing to help. We've got a ship to save." To her surprise, dozens of passengers moved forward. Trill's spots glowed with pride as she watched fear give way to determination. "Good," Sarah nodded, "because the hard part is just beginning. But together, Deathworlder and all, we're going to make it through this." The ship groaned around them, but for the first time since the rescue began, the passengers didn't flinch. They had seen what their Deathworlder rescuer could do, and more importantly, they had seen her heart. Sometimes, the scariest option really was the best one. Red emergency lights flashed throughout the stellar dreams as Sarah raced down the corridor toward the reactor room, her boots magnetized to combat the shifting gravity. Behind her, Trill struggled to keep up, her normally graceful floating form fighting against the gravitational waves. "Core temperature critical," the ship's computer announced. "Reactor containment failing in 15 minutes. Sarah reached the reactor room's sealed door and found the ship's engineer, a crystalline being named Zix, attempting to override the safety locks. "The radiation levels inside," Zix chimed anxiously. "They're far beyond safe limits for any species." Sarah checked the readings on the door's display and did some quick mental math. 300 rads and rising. Bad, but not impossible for a human. Trill's spots flashed pale with shock. "You can't go in there. That's enough radiation to destroy cellular structures. Humans evolved with background radiation on Earth," Sarah explained while pulling tools from her belt. "We can handle short exposures. Our cells know how to repair radiation damage." She turned to Zix. "Tell me about the reactor. What's wrong?" The crystalline engineer's facets sparkled as he explained. "The quantum storm disrupted the containment field. The core is overheating, and the cooling systems are offline. If it goes critical, everyone on this ship dies." Sarah finished. "Right. Open the door." Zix input the emergency codes, and the heavy door slid open with a hiss. Immediately, the radiation warning symbols began flashing faster. "I'm going in," Sarah said, checking her equipment one last time. "Trill, I need you and Zix to guide me through the reactor shutdown sequence from out here. The radiation will probably interfere with the computer systems." Before anyone could protest, Sarah stepped into the reactor room. The air itself seemed to shimmer with radiation, But she moved purposefully toward the reactor core. Her training kicked in. Check the readings, identify the problem, solve it step by step. The main cooling pump is misaligned, she called out, her voice slightly muffled by the thick air. The quantum storm must have knocked it loose. But the manual override requires direct contact with the reactor housing, Zix chimed in alarm. The radiation there is twice as strong. Sarah was already moving toward the reactor housing. Good thing humans are stubborn. Then, Trill, on my mark, I need you to route all remaining power to the backup cooling systems. Through the observation window, Trill and Zix watched as Sarah worked directly on the reactor housing. Her movements were precise despite the crushing gravity waves that kept hitting the ship. The radiation meter continued to climb. Sarah, Trill called out, her spots pulsing with worry. Your radiation exposure is reaching dangerous levels. You need to get out. Almost. Got it. Sarah grunted, using her full strength to turn the manual override. The misaligned pump screamed in protest, then clicked back into place. Now, Trill, hit the backup cooling. Trill activated the backup systems. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the reactor's angry red glow began to fade to a more stable blue. Core temperature dropping, the computer announced. Reactor stabilizing. Sarah stumbled out of the reactor room, her face pale but wearing a triumphant smile. See, just needed the human touch. You did it, Trill exclaimed, her spots glowing bright with joy. But the radiation. Nothing sometime in a medical pod won't fix, Sarah assured her. Humans are pretty good at bouncing back. Right now, we need to focus on getting everyone to safety while the reactor's stable. From the observation window, several passengers who had gathered to watch the crisis unfold stared at Sarah with new understanding. They had just witnessed something remarkable. A human using their Deathworld adaptations not to destroy, but to save. Zix's crystalline form hummed with respect. Perhaps, he chimed softly, being a Deathworlder isn't such a terrible thing after all. Sarah just smiled and checked her tools. The reactor was stable, but their mission wasn't over yet. They still had to get everyone off this ship. Sarah Chen stood before the gathered passengers in the main atrium of the Stellar Dreams, her face serious as she explained their situation. The reactor was stable, but the ship's hull couldn't take much more punishment from the quantum storm. We have one chance to get everyone out, she said, her voice carrying across the crowded room. The rescue ships are waiting just outside the storm, but we need to get there first. Trill floated beside her, translating for species who couldn't understand human speech. What's the plan? She asked, her spots glowing with nervous energy. Sarah activated a holographic display showing their escape route. We're going to create a human chain, she explained. Or, well, a multi-species chain. The passengers murmured amongst themselves as Sarah continued. The gravity fluctuations are too strong for small rescue pods. But if we link together and I lead, I can guide us through the worst of it. My body can handle the gravitational forces. A crystalline elder chimed in concern. You want us to hold on to each other through the quantum storm? Yes, Sarah nodded. I know it sounds scary, but it's our best chance. I'll take the worst of the gravitational forces, creating a stable path for everyone else. The ship shuddered, emphasizing her point. Warning lights flashed as another section of hull began to buckle. Time is running out, Sarah said firmly. I know you're still afraid of me. I know trusting a Deathworlder goes against everything you've been taught, but right now, my strength is your best chance at survival. Trill moved forward, her spots glowing with determination. I'll be second in the chain. I trust Sarah with my life. One by one, passengers began to step forward. The crystalline beings linked their facets together. The gas-based species formed stable bonds. The energy beings synchronized their frequencies. Soon, a chain of various alien species stretched through the atrium, each connected to the next in their own unique way. Sarah took her position at the front of the chain, securing herself to Trill with a special harness. "Remember," she called out, "no matter what happens, don't let go. The gravity will try to pull us apart, but we're stronger together." She opened the airlock, and the full force of the quantum storm hit them. Sarah grit her teeth as she felt the gravity pressing down, then lifting, then pushing sideways. But she kept moving, one step at a time, creating a stable path for the chain behind her. Through the chaos of the storm, the chain of beings held together. When gravity threatened to crush them, Sarah's strength kept them stable. When it tried to tear them apart, they held on tighter. Species that had never touched each other before now trusted their lives to one another. Halfway there, Sarah shouted over the storm's roar. Her muscles burned with effort, but she didn't slow down. She could feel the trust of 3,000 beings literally in her hands. A massive gravity wave hit them from the side. Several passengers cried out in fear, but nobody let go. They watched in awe as their human guide leaned into the wave, her body acting as a shield for the rest of the chain. "I can see the rescue ships," Trill announced, her spots pulsing with joy. Sarah smiled through her exhaustion. The hardest part was still ahead, the final approach where the gravity waves were strongest. But looking back at the chain of beings who had trusted a Deathworlder to lead them to safety, she knew they would make it. "Hold tight, everyone," she called out. "We're almost home." The chain of thousands moved forward as one, proving that sometimes the scariest option wasn't just the best choice. It was the one that brought out the best in everyone. 1 month after the dramatic rescue of the Stellar Dreams, Sarah Chen sat in Director Zax's office aboard Station 7, reading the latest reports on her datapad. The story of their rescue had spread across the galaxy, changing many long-held beliefs about humans. "You've started quite the revolution," Director Zax said, his antennae waving happily. "We've received over 200 applications from ships requesting human rescue specialists on their crews." Sarah looked up from her pad, smiling. And how many of those ships would have banned humans from boarding just 2 months ago? "Most of them," Zax admitted. "But you changed their minds. Not just about humans, but about working together across species barriers." Trill floated into the office, her spots glowing with excitement. "Sarah, the new training program got approved. The Galactic Council has officially authorized the creation of the Multi-Species Emergency Response Unit." The human rescue specialist stood up, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "How many signed up for the first class?" 50 beings from 30 different species," Trill reported proudly. "Even some crystalline beings and energy forms. They all want to learn how to work with Deathworlders." Sarah walked to the window, looking out at the space station's busy docking area. Several ships now sported the new red and gold stripe that marked them as part of the integrated rescue fleet. Each one had at least one human crew member. The passengers from the Stellar Dreams sent another thank you message. Director Zax mentioned, "They've started a foundation to promote understanding between Deathworlders and other species. They're calling it the Bridge of Trust program." "That's what really made the rescue work," Sarah said thoughtfully. "Not just my strength or ability to handle the gravity waves, but the trust we built. Every being in that chain had to trust each other." Trill's spots pulsed with warm colors. "And now look, the same species who feared touching each other are signing up to train together. You showed them that different doesn't mean dangerous." "Speaking of training," Director Zax clicked his mandibles thoughtfully, "we'd like you to lead the first class, Sarah. Show them how humans and other species can work together effectively." Sarah turned back from the window, her expression serious but pleased. "I'd be honored, but on one condition. Trill has to be my assistant instructor." She proved that bravery comes in all sizes and forms. Trill's spots flashed bright pink with surprise and joy. "Me? But I'm not a trained rescue worker." "You were brave enough to trust a Deathworlder and help others do the same," Sarah pointed out. "That's exactly what these new teams need to learn." A young intern rushed into the office, their crystalline forms sparkling with urgency. "Director, We just received a distress call from a mining colony in the Rigel system. Their environmental systems are failing. Director Zax looked at Sarah. Feel like taking the new rescue ship for a test run. It's been specially modified for human operators. Sarah was already checking her equipment. Ready when you are. Trill. Right behind you. The floating being replied instantly. Someone has to explain to the miners why they shouldn't panic when a Deathworlder shows up to save them. As they hurried toward the launch bay, Sarah thought about how much had changed. The frightened passengers who once backed away from her were now requesting human rescue teams. Species that never worked together were training side by side. The galaxy was learning that sometimes the scariest option was exactly what they needed. Rescue team ready for launch, Sarah reported from the pilot's seat of the new ship. Its hull bore the words GES Unity in multiple galactic languages. As they accelerated away from Station 7, Sarah smiled. Being a Deathworlder had its challenges, but it also meant being exactly what someone needed in their darkest hour. And that made all the difference in the galaxy.